Hello. That post-holiday feeling is something that's probably a familiar experience for many of us. We have been away, we've been relaxed, things have been different, and we may have enjoyed it. Or some of us may be striving for that whole routine and structure in our lives again. And of course, for our neurodiverse little people or big people, that's no different. It may be that actually they've really loved the holidays and loved all that freedom and that extra time to just get ready as and when they like and not have all that pressure that routine of a school morning especially brings. So it's really helpful for us to even be thinking at this stage, and I know for many of us that might seem a bit strange. You may only just have broken up on holiday, or you may be just in the middle of the holidays, but I really encourage you to have a think about how soon you can start to practice and work on some of the skills that we're going to need in order to smoothly move from our holiday time and our holiday mode to that more structured sort of school day. So let's have a think about the skills that we need in order for that to happen, because we can build on those throughout the summer holidays. So some of the skills that we need to work on are our executive functioning skills. And of course, we know that for our neurodiverse children that sometimes those areas of being able to plan and prepare and have an idea in our head of how things might go or how things might unravel can be tricky. So is there something practical that we can do to help them to understand that process? And of course, there's lots of things we can do. So we can put some routine and some structure and some visuals in place so that we create a schedule that our children are used to following. And there's no reason why we can't actually establish one of those kinds of schedules for the holidays, so that we are working in that whole idea of looking what we've got to do next or what we can do next, and then deciding on that. Because that skill is a really complex and challenging skill for lots of our neurodiverse young people, but it's a really important one if we're going to successfully transition from being on our holidays to getting ready for our school day. So we need to be thinking in terms of experiencing packing our bag very regularly and working on getting ourselves up and ready and thinking about how we get ourselves out on time. So even thinking about almost having some sort of practice days around working on those skills. So what do we need to do that will help our children to develop their planning, their memory, their prioritizing, all of those executive functioning skills that are needed to be able to successfully move on to get out to school and to execute a successful morning. So one of the really sort of sticking areas for our children can be around timekeeping and time management. And I know that for many families, that's something that often will have a conversation with me about. And I think one of the really nice books that I came across, and certainly it's a challenge in my life, is timekeeping. And I think managing just what you can fit into what amount of time. And again, they're quite familiar feelings for many of us when we try and pack too much in, or we're rushing from one thing to another and never quite finishing one task before we move on to another task. And then of course your child's neurodiversity might mean that actually they're quite monotopic in the way that they work. So they might be really focusing and find it difficult to move off of focus onto something new or onto something different. So I have this lovely book called Dirty Laundry. It's an adult book around ADHD, written by a super couple who Richard and Roxanne, and they do a super podcast as well called Dirty Laundry. So really worth a listen and if you're wanting a smile about your ADHD. What I really like about this book is that it comments on that change of narrative in terms of understanding our neurodiverse persons' challenges. So we want to change the narrative. So if your ADHD is always running late, realize that it's because they struggle with it. It's not because they don't love or respect you or want to get out to school on time or want to execute that morning routine successfully. So we need to first of all establish how are we going to go about this? And I know some families that have even got alarm clocks in place that help with that sort of practicing of that waking up. I know a young man who had an alarm clock that jumped off the table, a novelty alarm, and the only way to stop it ringing was to get out of bed, collect the alarm and put it back on the stand. So for him, that was the extent of support that he needed in actually getting out of bed and starting that whole morning routine. And of course, for some families, the whole countdown to when we need to get out to school can be really hard. So thinking about what we can do to support that countdown. So it might be that, again, we use a clock or we use an alarm, or it might be that we're using something like one family had a big giant paper chain and they had it just drawing pinned up by the door, and every 5 minutes a chain got taken off so that the children were aware of that time ticking away, that countdown. And they had a visual schedule next to it which reminded them what they needed to do in each of those 5 minutes. So real practical ways of supporting our children in developing those skills that we know from research that can be quite challenging. So those executive functioning skills that we need in order to execute complex decision making and choice making and following of routines, and some of those timekeeping elements that can be really challenging. So I know another family who, to help with the journey of school, they had a practice run, and they actually had gone out and they'd marked coloured chalks on the lampposts. Every 10 lampposts they'd done a coloured chalk, and they followed that. So that helped them with their journey to school. Other families have done similar things for passing the time in the car. So having some means of perhaps building up or building down time in the car with a countdown system. And then other families have used something like something that's interest of that to that family or to that child. This is one that I made for a little boy who was massively into cars. So we used a car wheel and we just cut up all the little pieces. And the family wrote on each of the pieces what needed happening, what was going to happen, and helped with that whole preparing for that routine, which of course took a lot of the pressure off. But also what we can do is we can section out and plan not only what we're going to need to do in order to get out, but actually what's happening after school, so that then we're sectioning off in a very sort of palatable way some of the ideas around how the day will look. So we're marking out perhaps preparing for homework after school, perhaps our screen time, when we're going to eat, when we'll get a rest, so that we're actually having that practice before the day comes and we do have to try and get ourselves back into that whole school ready state of mind and body. So having those practice days, putting in some routines that we can use and they'll be familiar by the time we're going back to school. And remembering that for some children that structure of school is really valuable and really important, and from others it can be a real challenge. So thinking of the things that we can remind them that they've enjoyed in the past that they'll be doing again, and reminding them of the things that actually are the law, that actually going to school is the law. I know families who have been on the .gov website to help with that whole understanding why we need to go to school and what's that all about. So making sure that we've equipped our children with as much practice, as much experience and as many opportunities as we can to build up some of those skills that we know that they will need for that whole transition to get those families and get your family back on the road successfully.